Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 295 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Con Whiteley. And today's episode is on what are the advantages and disadvantages of clinical cutoffs. And it is Sunday, the 10th of November 2024 as I record this. So today's podcast episode is absolutely brilliant and I'm really excited about it because clinical cutoffs is a topic that I've heard a lot about. Like, there's not been a lecture or at least a term where I've not heard this mentioned at least once, that clinical cutoffs are not great, but we rely so heavily on them as a profession, mostly because of the biomedical model and the public services which actually are medical services disguised as mental health services from time to time. So it's really interesting to actually look at clinical cutoffs for the first time for myself, because I don't just want to do this for my own education, because I keep hearing about this and no one's ever willing to go into greater depth about why clinical cutoffs aren't great. But I also want to do this for you and your own clinical psychology education, just so you know the pros and cons of clinical cutoffs and why they serve our clients, but they also seriously don't. I mean, like, to be honest, clinical cutoffs are not great. There's more disadvantages than advantages, especially because I keep putting twists on the advantages to make them disadvantages. So this is a great episode. I had a lot of fun writing this, and I know you're going to enjoy it too. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. And the first one is, are blood vessels secret plays in pain? The level of pain that you feel after being poked or having a wound attended to can be affected by all types of factors. Playing a distracting VR game can reduce pain substantially, for example, as can hypnosis. Some studies have found that even limb position can affect pain too. If one hand has been hurt, crossing the arms in front of the body can alleviate pain. It's thought this is because it impedes the brain's normal processes for working out the precise location of bodily damage. Now, a paper in the European Journal of Pain, a team led by Arthur S. Curtin at UCLA Leuven in Belgium, report a new observation in this area. They find it if one arm is hurting, lifting it up in the air can make the pain worse, an effect that is seemingly modulated by gravity's effect on blood vessels, and which should open doors to better understanding of how we experience pain. Okay, so this is actually quite a good one. Not because I have any interest in pain management, even though I know it's a massive area within clinical psychology and health psychology, and people who are interested in that, I think, are amazing. Amazing because it really does support the argument and the point that psychology has a major impact in the world that goes way beyond mental health conditions. Psychology can impact and can positively influence physical health conditions and their recovery. I also don't have a massive interest in gravity after a rather awful lecture I had about 2 years ago. But when we combine them, this is actually quite good though, because again it does tap into that sort of psychophysics which I keep coming back to. Recently, I've actually got to do a podcast episode on it, because I keep banging on about psychophysics to my friends, even though I've only ever had one lecture on it, and that was like back in 2019. Okay, I've actually got to do that. Maybe, maybe there will be something for next week. Because it just goes to show that what happens to our physical body, for example, our blood vessels, and how the physical force of gravity impacts our biology, does impact the psychological experience of pain. And to me, that is fascinating. It's absolutely brilliant that there are physical things that can happen to us, which then have an impact on our psychological processes, which, to be honest, is quite a lot of for mental health and quite a lot of psychological processes. But it's interesting to work out why does that happen. So now that we have this information, now we do need to focus on it because of what are the implications for physical treatment. Also, is there anything we could do to these blood vessels to help us experience less pain? Just some food for thought. So the next one is COVID can have serious mental health fallout. Vaccination can help. A massive study of UK health data reveals the health benefits of COVID-19 vaccination in mitigating a wide range of post-infection serious mental health conditions. Drawing from the medical data of over 18 million people registered with GPs in England, Vexia Walker and her colleagues found that the incidence of mental health conditions was significantly higher a week to a month after a diagnosis of COVID-19, compared to before contracting it or not getting it at all. This was especially the case following severe cases that have required hospitalization. The team suggests that vaccination likely offered a protection as intended, reducing a disease severity and systematic inflammation, which in turn presumably minimizes subsequent symptoms. The peace of mind provided by being vaccinated, they suggest, may play a role too. Get the full findings in Emily Reynolds' latest BPS Research Digest write-up. So this is something that I can definitely understand there, but because, let's face it, COVID-19 is a horrible disease, because when you get it, you feel really sick. You can't do that much though, but you've got to self-isolate. You've got to cut yourself off from your social world, and even your family though, if you're living in the same household. So that isolation and that being lonely is really gonna impact your mental health, especially if you're struggling any way though. And even people who didn't have mental health difficulties before, they really struggled with that isolation and being cut off from their social world that made them feel happy, safe, and connected, and also gave their life purpose. Because that's another factor. You can't work if you got COVID because you need to self-isolate. So that also takes away meaning and a purpose and others and even more social interaction in your everyday life. So that is absolutely horrible. But also, if you have a really severe case and you need hospitalization, that is really scary too though. Mainly because the medical doctors and the medical staff are not great, especially in extremely high tense conditions and high tense and stressful situations in delivering good standard medical care, simply because everyone is so busy and they're under so much pressure, especially when you've got especially when you've got thousands of patients that come in every single day with a life-threatening COVID-19 though. And if you're put on a ventilator, then you're going to be very, very scared though, because you basically think that you're going to die. So all of that takes a massive mental health toll. But then if there's a way like the vaccination and to actually reduce all of that, just you don't get sick, you don't need to go into hospital, you don't need to be scared of dying because your symptoms are less severe, etc., then that's only going to impact your mental health positively. So that does help. So the final one is, reading bodily signals could help us stay sharp during scams. We know that older people are at high risk of falling prey to scams, and that a number of factors related to aging can contribute to this. A tendency to evaluate faces more positively is one example, as well as a decreased inability to discern trustworthy and untrustworthy behaviour. Yet, there may be one way that older adults can decrease their chance of getting scammed. According to a new study in the journals of, I'm sorry, I do not know how to say that word, Geology Series B. There, a US and Canada based team finds that nurturing interception or attentiveness to bodily signals could help them better detect deception. So, but that last one's actually quite thought-provoking, because I know on the podcast before, I've covered a lot about how older people are more likely to be scammed, etc. Well, etc. And also in my own trauma recovery, I'm focusing a lot more on like bodily signals, being in tune with my body, and stuff like that. And I really do know that there is a link, because like your body does know this stuff way before your conscious mind does, though. So if you listen to your body, what your body is trying to tell you, and if you try and focus on understanding that, then you actually can get a lot of really good, high quality information, which can be very life saving at times. So I definitely think we need to do more with this, because if we've got these findings, and if this continues to be replicated and supported, then I think that there's got to be an intervention. Now, I don't know what this intervention would look like. Would this be an in-person thing, a book, a blog post, etc., to help train older people to be more attentive to their bodies, just so when a scam does happen, they can actually listen to their bodies, which, to be honest, is probably telling them that they're about to be scammed. So it's very interesting to think about what the implications of this could be, and it'd be even more interesting to see what the next steps could be in the future. So I hope you enjoy the psychology news section, so let's move on to the personal update. So we're moving on to the personal update. So this week I've got a massive tip for everyone. Please do not overwork yourself. Please do not do that to yourself, because that will only end very, very badly. So this week I've had a very crazy week, but I've had a blast. Even though I didn't realise it till it was way too late, that it was really starting to impact my mental health, because I've done so much outreach work through my university this week. Like, I definitely overbooked myself, because I've been basically all over the county. I've been up to North Kent, where I live, through like Medway. I've also been down to Sandwich. I've been in Canterbury, and I've been to some other places as well. I've been to lots of really fun events. I've had some great conversations with other ambassadors, with the students, and I've definitely had a positive impact on the world. But I've just been working so much, I've been sort of neglecting my own to-do list. Yeah, especially because I've had some like full long data, like Monday and Tuesday were basically 12-hour days, because I was going to different events and like stuff. And then me and my best friends went up to London for the day to get our haircuts and like stuff though, and just to like hang out. So I would definitely say that please do not overbook yourself, because by the time Friday happened, I was thinking about it, and I was like, oh my god, I've not done my to-do list. I've not done all the really fun things that I've got to do. For example, writing blog posts, doing some proof editing, formatting of like different short stories, actually starting a new novella, which I'm so looking forward to. And just stuff like that, really basic stuff that I know makes me happy, but I didn't schedule in time to actually do that, because I really overbooked myself there, which was bad, I say in air quotes, because it's just something I've got to remember. Do not book an insanely busy week like this week. So just something to remind yourself. And then the only other thing that I want to mention is this is more for my own entertainment, but for my university, I've actually emailed them saying, can I have a dyslexia screening and a dyspraxia screening? Because it's getting to the point where I'm getting quite chronic and it's no longer funny. Like, for the longest time, me and my friends would joke about how I'm probably dyslexic because I add in letters, I like switch around words so it doesn't make sense. I take away letters. For example, like one of my favorite examples when I was actually arguing quite strongly that I wasn't dyslexic. So in this text, I wanted to write might, M-I-H. No. But in this text, I wanted to write might. For example, I might go out later. But in this text, I actually wrote, I mind something. For example, your psychological mind. So as you can see, they're very different words. I switched around letters, but one that keeps popping up and one that really annoys me. I don't know how I do this. I keep mixing up the words matter. For example, you matter to me, and I change it to happen. For example, that happened to me. They can be in completely different contexts. I always mix those words up because I really can't tell my left from my right, and tons of different little things though. So I hope I get this screening. To be honest, I hope it comes back positive and I have got these conditions, and then I can get a diagnosis at some point. Not because I need it, not because I need the support in my everyday life. It's just, it would be nice to know, because this is getting quite annoying now, especially because just because this is the constant joke with my friends, and I'm like, this is starting to get beyond a joke now, and I actually just want to know for myself. So, just something interesting that I wanted to share with you. And another interesting thing about doing screenings is that you can actually understand what your clients are going to go through in the future. So I just think that it helps to build the understanding through experience, which is really important in clinical work. But then it also just helps us to develop a bit more empathy for our clients. So as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment out of the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast. And you can always leave a comment out of the show notes at Sci-Fi Wiley, or leave a comment on the Facebook post or LinkedIn post. And today's episode has been sponsored by Clinical Psychology Reflections Volume Unit 5. So this is a great book that came out last month at the time of the recording, and this is a really fun book filled up with lots of the different clinical psychology reflections. So the reason why I like these more reflective books is because the issue that I definitely say in air quotes is that with my normal psychology books, they're all very fact-based and they're all grounded in facts and figures. However, there are certain things that I want to reflect on. I use in my experiences. I also want to reflect on different aspects of that clinical psychology where there isn't a great amount of research based about it, but I've had the conversations with friends, family members, different clinical psychologists, and I've also got my own thoughts and feelings on the topic, which I've developed from my and my fact-based opinions. So these clinical psychology reflections are just helping me to explore these different topics in a lot more depth. So in this book, we focus about trauma, how trauma can drive action, different aspects of clinical psychology research, and so many more absolutely brilliant topics which I get really excited about, and I know lots of people enjoy these books too. So definitely check them out because they will really help you to deepen your understanding of that clinical psychology beyond the lecture and textbooks that you're assigned. So that's Clinical Psychology Reflections, Volume 5, available from all major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and hardback version from Amazon local bookstore or local library if you request it. And if you want the audiobook narrated by artificial intelligence, now you can add selected audiobook retailers like Spotify, Kobo, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, Every, and selected library systems like Biblioteca, Overdrive, and Baker & Taylor. So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons. And as always, a massive thank you to my wonderful patrons, because your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. So if you want to become a patron of the show and get access to tons of great rewards, now you can at patreon.com/The Psychology World Podcast. Or if you want to support the podcast on a one-off basis instead, now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Conor Wiley. So that's enough of the personality. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about what are the advantages and disadvantages of clinical cutoffs. And I'm really excited about this, so let's dive into it. What are clinical cutoffs, first of all? So within clinical psychology, we use clinical cutoffs as thresholds for mental health conditions, so we can see if someone's symptoms and mental health difficulties meet the criteria for a specific diagnosis. There are some pros and cons of clinical cutoffs, and that's why we're going to be focusing on them in today's episode. In addition, as a small example that is related to clinical cutoffs, a lot of psychometric tests use their clinical cutoffs to measure if someone has a mental health condition and what the severity is. For instance, in my own research, I like using the Mental Health Inventory version 5 because it's easy and validated and uses the following clinical cutoffs. And this is just a small extract from a draft method section that I wrote. This study used the Yoken index, again I butchered that, apologies, to determine the mental health inventory version 5 cutoff point, because it is the least dependent on population prevalence, given a cutoff point of 76. Kelly et al. 2008. Whereas the Depression, Anxiety and Stress Scale 21 uses the following. Depression, anxiety and stress scores from each of these subscales were calculated by adding up the item scores, with the severity of depression reflecting 0 to 9 normal depressive symptoms, 10 to 13 mild depressive symptoms, 14 to 20 moderate depressive symptoms, 21 to 27 severe depressive symptoms, and 28 plus extremely severe depressive symptoms. And I could go through the other two scales, but in audio it doesn't quite work if you will keep listing them. But you can see though that as a result, different psychometric scales have different clinical cutoffs to help them determine if a mental health condition is present and the severity of the condition. What are the advantages of clinical cutoffs? Let's start off by focusing on the positive aspects of clinical cutoffs, because they can be very useful at times. Firstly, clinical cutoffs allow us to diagnose mental health conditions in a standardized way, so we can ensure consistency across different mental health settings as well as professionals. For instance, if you're using the Mental Health Inventory 5 in your diagnosis, it doesn't matter if you're assessing people in Manchester and they get a score of 80, or people down in Dover and they get a score of 80. Both of those numbers should mean the exact same thing in terms of severity and the presence of a mental health condition, so that allows countrywide standardization of diagnosis. Even though I will add, I've spoken a lot on the podcast before about the inconsistency of diagnosis amongst mental health professionals, and there is a lot of literature on the topic. Hence, you could argue clinical cutoffs help to get rid of some inconsistency, but it certainly doesn't solve the problem of inconsistency like it claims to. This is why the DSM-5 isn't that good. Secondly, one of the aspects that I like about clinical cutoffs is that it provides clients with a way to access treatment. Personally, in an ideal world, I'm a firm believer that everyone should get access to mental health support when they need it most before they get so severe that their life is in danger. For example, I cannot get mental health support for my eating disorder until I'm dangerously underweight, so I'm gonna keep having to get more severe without any support, which is quite dangerous, and that's something that I'm trying to fight alone. But eating disorders, they're very tricky about that. Anyway, the reason why clinical cutoffs allow people to access treatment is because they can make individuals eligible for certain treatments, insurance cover, and support services. This is why in the UK you cannot access eating disorder support until you meet the clinical cutoff for your body mass index, and you have to be dangerously below your normal weight. The BMI is a useless and outdated concept, which I've covered on a past episode. Although, to put a more positive spin on this disadvantage, I want to mention that from a public services perspective, I understand why clinical cutoffs are needed, since there will never be enough staff, money, or support available for every single person who needs it. And there definitely isn't enough staff or money for preventative mental health support. Therefore, clinical cutoffs help public services to target their support to the people who need it most so that they can focus on these individuals. Finally, from a clinical research perspective, clinical cutoffs are very useful because standardized cutoffs give researchers a clear criteria for inclusion in their study. This can help them create more valid and credible studies that can improve our understanding as well as treatment of mental health conditions. In my opinion, this is a big advantage of the clinical cutoffs because it is a way of knowing that your research publications do have the mental health condition to clinically significant levels. So this allows you to design and set up more valid experimental and control groups. Because this is an issue I actually have with current mental health research done at universities, so my masters, undergrads, and even some PhD students. Because university students are so easy to get to, they make up the majority of research samples, even when they're studying depression. And believe me, I know and I understand that depression, anxiety, and other conditions are very prevalent amongst university students. Yet, from an empirical standpoint, for better or for worse, part of me would like to see researchers engage with clinical populations that have reached the clinical cutoff for the mental health condition that they're investigating. It isn't a perfect idea, but it's the world we live in. What are the disadvantages of clinical cutoffs? As you can tell already, I am a little critical of clinical cutoffs because I've already mentioned some extra disadvantages in the previous section, yet we still need to investigate some more disadvantages. Firstly, a disadvantage of the clinical cutoffs is that they oversimplify mental health conditions by boiling them down into a set of numbers. They completely dismiss the complexity of mental health and they overlook the nuances of someone's experience. The issue with oversimplifying mental health is that it can lead to misdiagnosis and it does lead to overlooking the people that need mental health support. For example, if we look at my eating disorder, I told the medical doctor, and yes, I have massive issues. I was seen by a medical doctor for a psychological condition. I will say that to the day I die. Thus, I've been using a kilogram a week for about 2 months. I've made myself physically sick twice in the past few months through malnutrition. This is linked to my weight, and I'm barely eating 1,000 calories most of the days because I'm terrified to eat. Still, because my body mass index was okay, he said I'm fine and he let me go. It is ridiculous. I needed the support, and I was courageous enough to ask for the support as much as I didn't want to, and then the medical doctors just turned me away. Secondly, our next disadvantage builds off the last one, was clinical cutoffs are very inflexible. Clinical cutoffs are very rigid, so they fail to account for social, individual, and cultural differences in how someone's symptoms and difficulties manifest. Again, this means that people might not receive a diagnosis or the mental health support that they really need. One example that shows the individual differences is when someone has anorexia and atypical anorexia. Both of these people have anorexia, but one person has the extreme weight loss amongst all the other diagnostic criteria, but the other person with atypical anorexia doesn't have the extreme weight loss and still has all the other diagnostic criteria. Therefore, these are essentially the same condition, both are very deadly, but atypical anorexia doesn't meet the clinical cutoff for mental health support at times. It makes no sense when two people have the same deadly condition, but only one type of a person gets mental health support from what I've seen. Finally, the last major disadvantage of the clinical cutoffs is that they tend to focus on deficiencies, as well as pathology, as well as what is wrong with someone. I hate that term. With passion. Instead of their resilience and their strengths, you can tell that clinical cutoffs arose from the biomedical model that sees mental health conditions as evil disorders that need to be cured at all costs, instead of seeing them as conditions that a person lives with and it needs to develop adaptive coping mechanisms to help them thrive in their everyday life. Just because the person has a mental health condition doesn't make them flawed, evil, or messed up. It just means that they need a little more support to decrease the psychological distress, improve their lives, and take back control of their lives so they can live their ideal life. Clinical cutoffs dismiss that approach to mental health care completely. They imply that someone has a mental disorder that needs to be cured and fixed because there is something wrong with a person. I completely reject that notion, like the majority of modern clinical psychology. Conclusion. So, at the end of this podcast episode, I want to say that I was rather surprised about how I was a little more critical of clinical cutoffs than I thought I was going to be. I won't deny there are advantages, like clinical cutoffs mean that we can diagnose mental health conditions in a standardized way. They allow clients to access treatment, and they're useful for designing standardized research samples in clinical research, even though there are disadvantages in each of those advantages. Additionally, the disadvantages of a clinical cutoffs include simplifying mental health, they're inflexible, and they pathologize the person's mental health difficulties. Ultimately, while there's not going to be an end to clinical cutoffs for a long while because we don't have anything to replace them with, probably until we come up with a valid and widely accepted alternative for the DSM, we need to be wary about them and not accept clinical cutoffs as perfect. As aspiring or qualified psychologists, it is our job to balance the use of clinical cutoffs with a holistic approach to mental health care so we can understand, appreciate, and value the unique context and experience of every single client that we see. Never ever reduce your client to a mere set of numbers, as impossible as that might seem at times, when we have the pressure of waiting list, bosses, and policy breathing down our necks, and that's before we even think about our ever-increasing caseload. Clinical cutoffs are a tool for our job, and not a perfect tool at that. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did, because after hearing about clinical cutoffs for so long and me not actually researching it or me not being taught anything more about it, I thought, right, I finally need to look into this. Because clinical cutoffs is something that impacts my mental health, my ability to access treatment, so I wanted to try and understand why is this the case. And if you know anyone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the words about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, then please check out Clinical Psychology Reflections Volume 5, available from all the usual places. And if you want to support the podcast on a monthly basis, then please check out patreon.com/The Psychology World Podcast. And you can also support the podcast on a one-off basis at buymeacoffee.com/Connor So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwiley.net. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.